Welcome to the Marshall Pruett Podcast, presented by Cooper Tires. My guest for this two-part episode is Kevin Jeannette. I will state up front, Kevin is one of my favorite people on the planet. You might know him as father of sports car pro racer and race winner supreme Gunnar Jeannette. And while that's probably his finest work to date, Kevin and his lovely wife, he is just someone that is a true gem. And I realize that a lot of the folks I try and bring to you in long-form podcasts are folks you might have heard of before, where there's a bit of a instant buy-in. Oh, I know that person. I have some connection to their life or career. Kevin might not fall into that category. He's been more of a behind-the-scenes guy, crew chief, mechanic, restorer, etc. I would say that he, along with my friend Harley Cluxton, who I have a couple parts of my life and racing career episodes to post with him as well, definitely fall into a category of, while you might not know them as a frontline name, boy, I think you're going to enjoy this two-part episode quite a bit, just because he's such a character. He has so many stories to tell, and at the heart of it all, this guy has led a life that just about anybody would pay money to have just for a couple of days. Kevin, through his Gunnar Racing business in Florida, he has restored the world's most valuable car, Preston Hen's Ferrari 275 that raced at Le Mans. He was the crew chief to some of the world's most famous drivers, Foyt, Andretti, Wollek, Unser, Paul Newman. He was good friends with Paul Newman, which he speaks about here a bit. Also, some of the most infamous, Randy Lanier, the Whittington brothers, and some of the other notorious drug smugglers who really made their name in the 1980s, late 70s and 80s in IMSA's rather wild GT and GTP scene, which we speak about here as well. I think I can say for certain he has owned more Porsche 962s than anyone. I believe he is close to that distinction as well with Porsche 917s. I think I'm also safe in saying when it comes to owning road Porsches and Porsche race cars, he has probably purchased, restored, and sold more than anybody on the planet as well. Kevin is Porsche. Porsche is Kevin. You throw in all of his years of working in IMSA as crew chiefs on everything, in IndyCar for a little while. As a crew chief, he won the first ever race for Porsche's 962, and so on and so forth. Kevin's just led an amazing life and career, and I hope you enjoy sitting back and capturing both parts of this discussion we had. We actually recorded this back over a weekend in late 2016, and while I had a great desire to post this beforehand, got a little bit behind and was trying to think of right timing. And with Porsche's Rennsport reunion coming up this weekend, I figure a weekend dedicated to Porsche with one of Porsche's most important, most influential men behind the scenes is definitely the right fit. We end up opening the conversation in classic Kevin style of talking about something totally out of left field. As a person who has owned Grateful Dead leaders Jerry Garcia 13 window VW bus, I think at least twice. That's where we pick up, talk about his Southern California upbringing and hot rodding really being his thing. It's a great story about Riverside Raceway and an engine pulling competition he was part of. We get into all kinds of fun stuff, and I believe we end up stopping right here at part one, where we get to the very famous incident at the 24 Hours of Daytona in 1985 or so, when A.J. Foyt was brought in to drive. They went on to win, but brilliant Bob Wollek, his quote of who the F is A.J. Foyt, who was suddenly thrust into his car. That's where we stop part one, and then pick up part two with Kevin talking about that whole incident, his relationship with Paul Newman in part two, Whittington brothers, and some of the other fun stuff that went on in IMSA's powdery, leafy 1980s in Florida, the rather famous Porsche 966 prototype that Kevin built, and so lots of good stuff there in part two. I'll do a separate little intro here for part two, but just want to let you know that starting out with part one, really do get into his life and career and upbringing, and from there the stories and insanity just continues to flow. You know, you can get every episode of the Marshall Pruett Podcast on iTunes, also on Podbean, on our Marshall Pruett Podcast Facebook page, and there are plenty of podcast aggregators that pick up everything we do here as well. With all that said, let's get rolling with our man, our crazy man, beloved man, Kevin Jeannette, his life and racing career, Part 1.
I actually have Jerry Garcia's art-prone 59 VW bus that was used for a Discover Card promo worldwide for a food drive. And I don't know if when they started the food drive it was because of Jerry Garcia's, you know, as an artist. If you know anything about him, you know, he designed ties and things like that. And it was normally, you know, watercolor was kind of his fit. But they got this bus. They just bought it from someone, not because it was anything cool, but it was original mango green and gray. I think that was that color combination. I should know. I have the bus. But as it ends up, another fellow San Franciscan, Ionian, Northern Californian dude that you might know is a guy named Bill Kincaid.
Yeah.
And you know Bill?
I've never met him, but I know of him.
Okay, well, he had a BMW M something or other at the Historics this year, but they had a braking problem with it. It was just finished restoration, and they just could not get the thing to stop. But Bill was one of the two inventors of iTunes.
Yeah.
So needless to say, he lives you-know-where the silicone flows like gold, and he's an Apple guy now. But, you know, we talk about the whole San Francisco thing and this and that just because he's a friend. And he emails me one day and he says, hey, this is for you, dude. And it's a picture of this mango green 13-window VW bus.
Wow.
And I look at it and I say, God, it's really nice. Low mileage, super, super low mileage, less than 20,000 miles, original. And it's just impeccable. And I look at it and it's hitting me upside the head, and I just can't figure out why I'm so enamored by this car. So I click on one of the little links down below, and it's, you know, talks about the car. Doesn't talk about anything about Jerry Garcia or the Discover Card, which is a mega company. And it painted like Jerry Garcia's artwork, okay? Just a peace sign on the Volkswagen insignia in the front, the whole hippie paint thing, and gorgeous, not like it was spray canned or painted with a brush in the day. So I don't click on it, but I look, and it has a little paper trail on the damn thing. It's got every owner, because the guy that owns the car now is, as I have the car now, he's one of 6 guys removed. So I'm reading all about it, and in this one little area, it goes back to the original owner, this guy from Pennsylvania. And it dawned on me, son of a bitch, I had a bus just like it. Same color, same everything. I mean, I knew I had a bus like it. I just didn't put 2 and 2 together yet. And then it said this guy's from Pennsylvania. And I go, wow, that's kind of weird. I thought the guy I bought mine from was from Pennsylvania. Wow. And it says the second owner is some car broker from West Palm Beach, Florida. And I say to myself, first of all, I'm not a car broker, although it seems to be the only time I make money doing this is selling a car. And I'm thinking, son of a bitch, this is my old car. I don't click on the next link yet. I'm wondering how I can come up with $65,000 for it, because when I sold it back to someone else in Pennsylvania,
what year was this? When was this?
I sold it in '86.
Wow.
I bought it in '86, and I think I sold it by the end of '86, maybe into '17. And everything I talk about on a date or a time, you got to go circa. Because unless I look at it in print, you know, a lot of water's gone under my car tree. So I'm reading up on this thing going, I can't believe it. that's my old bus. And then I look and it says repainted. And I thought, it couldn't have been repainted.
No.
When I bought the bus from the guy in Pennsylvania, it had like 7,200 miles on it. That was it. Not 10,000 miles. I paid $7,800 for it, or less than $8,000 or something, at a Hemmings. Remember, we didn't have the internet or even cell phones, or barely had faxes at that point.
Yeah.
I bought it. I saw it in Hemmings. Luckily, I got Hemmings, when they came out on the newsstand. I called the guy up and said, "Hey, man, I'll take the bus. This is sold." He goes, "No, there's people interested in it, but no one's giving me money." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to Federal Express you money." And that was pretty new in the 80s,
Yeah.
as you know. And he goes, "Okay, well, if it gets in before someone else's, it's yours." Man, I couldn't have got I got a cashier's check. I might have even sent him cash, who knows. And off I go. The dude called me when the feds got there and said, "It's yours." I said, "Thank you." A couple days later, this guy calls me up and says, "Hey, you got my bus." And I didn't sound like the guy I bought the bus from. And I go, "Oh, are you like the guy's brother?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "You don't sound like the guy I bought the bus from." He goes, "No, you bought my bus." The guy had attitude.
Wow.
And I said, "Okay, I don't understand, because if I bought a car and someone said I bought it because I already sent them money," I said, "evidently you're thinking I bought it because I sent him the money and he already got it and you didn't. And maybe you could ask me this question. Did you send the guy money?" He said, "No, because you already did." And I said, "Case rested. You can go pound shit all I give a crap."
Wow.
And I might not have said that, but I just said, "You snooze, you lose." And that was it. So I get the bus. I know this doesn't have anything to do with your podcast.
No, this is awesome. I mean, the podcast
Okay.
is whatever we make it, brother.
Okay, I get the bus in the summertime, and it is, as you can imagine, something that the original owner took care of for 7,200 miles. I can't believe it. And I'm a car guy, and I have a bunch of Volkswagens. We didn't have room to put it in the shop at the time, because when in 86 or 87, I had just got this place, and there were two buildings on the property, but one building was rented, and my building I was in. So I had to keep it outside. No great sin yet. Was out there for a couple days, and something came in, Delta Dash for one of the race cars from Porsche or something, Miami. And Delta Dash, was a way to get something not FedEx from another country, and you could put it on an airplane and you could get it rather than waiting, 4 months on a ship.
Yep.
So I thought, wouldn't it be cool that Sharon and I, my dear sweet wife of 42 years a week ago, would take a little trip to Miami. And I forgot about how fast a 40 horsepower Volkswagen bus was. We jumped in that thing, and about 4 days later, we got to Miami. Oh, my God. It was torture. It was hot in the summertime. But we loved every minute. People would give us the peace sign, or what we called the high sign in the day. Wasn't that cool? People in Florida actually got it. Got whatever we had to get, and it wasn't anything big. We could have taken a car with air conditioning. It was just fun to drive it.
Sure.
But where I parked was Miami Air Freight somewhere. We were in there at least an hour getting whatever we had to get, because it had to get cleared through customs, blah, 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 blah. Jump back in the bus, take the 4-day trek back to Gunnar Racing in West Palm Beach. And I parked in the same place it was when I jumped in and took it away, because there was still no room in the shop. It must have been a week later. One of my guys is doing something on the side of the grass between my building and the next door neighbor building. And he comes in, he says, "Hey, man, was the Volkswagen emblem missing off your bus when you got it?" And I thought, you don't have a bus with this many miles on it. Now, I'm the keeper of it. It's my responsibility to not get this thing messed up. And I go, "You're kidding, right?" And he said, "No. Sounds like someone took your insignia." At that point, because this place was so new, I didn't have a fence around it yet. Somebody saw it parked in front of the shop, snuck in, and pried it off the front of the car.
Well, if we're 86, that's when the Beastie Boys were becoming popular, and their whole thing was wearing the big, the large
That's right.
VW logos off of buses. So I pretty much guarantee you that the person who stole it had no idea of the Grateful Dead lineage and was just devoted to the Beastie Boys.
No doubt. So it killed me. Now, this guy that I said you snooze, you lose would call me every 2 weeks. Hey, man, still calling you about that bus. And I was kind to him because I thought, hey, okay, fine. He goes, man, he says, I'll give you $10,000 for it. And it might have been $11,000, could have been $9,000, whatever he said. And every time he called me back, he'd add another $50 on it or something. Now, I am punishing myself because I have ruined this bus because of the original VW logo being typed off it. This guy calls me back now every couple months, whatever. Now the thing is parked inside, it's not getting beat up or anything. And it's got no insignia on it. Finally, I gave in. I felt so bad, and I really did. Plus, I needed the money. I sold it to this guy, I think, for $14,000.
Wow.
I almost doubled my money. Maybe it was more. Again, I could look at the bill of sale when we sold it, but the guy cried and moaned, and I said, it's your only chance to get it, but I got bad news, too. He goes, well, you blew it up, or you crashed it. And I said, no, someone actually took the logo off the front of it. And he said, I can deal with that. However it was, I don't even remember if he came and got it, if we put it on a carrier or something. And back to, I think it went to Pennsylvania, it went. So all the time goes under the bridge now of time. And Bill Kincaid says, dude, this is you. Through the next day or two, I realized it was mine, and I emailed him back, and I said, Bill, you don't know how right you are. I said, I used to own it. And I said, click on the thing. And I said, I'm the guy from the broker from Florida. And he goes, you're kidding. I said, no. So then he said, did you read the bit on Jerry Garcia? And I said, what's that? And now I hadn't bought it yet. A couple weeks has gone by. Guy's asking $60,000 or $65,000 for it. I said, what are you talking about? He says, this whole thing. He says, look, you're going to be working on a 934 of mine. He said, why don't you let me buy it for you and just do it towards the money it's going to cost me for you to do my 934? I said, Bill, you're just doing that so I can work on your 934 sooner than the 5 years, I said. It would be before I could work on. He goes, it's got to be worth something. I said, let me go to Jerry Garcia first. He goes, well, you ain't going to want to talk to me again. So we hang up, and I click on this other link, and there it is. OMG. Here's this unbelievably cool, and it's undoubtedly done with an airbrush in his art form. And on the side of it, he had a little fox as one of his logo things, and always signed Jerry Garcia on his ties and stuff. Maybe the fox had something. You could look and find a lot more people that know about it than me. But this fox had something to do with Garcia and something that he promoted in his artwork. And the bus is all, even the windows are painted. Of course, not the front of the rear windows, but because it's a 13-window bus, they're all painted too, but really nicely done. And then you read on. Discover wanted a promo because they pick certain things, charities and this and that, because that's a smart thing to do. If you're, giving money away, give it to children or homeless or whatever. And this was for homeless people or people that couldn't afford food, basically. Yeah. You didn't have to be homeless. And it was a big deal. You can Google it. Just Google Jerry Garcia Discover Card promo. Big New York, advertising agency did it. Still around today. The gal that did the whole PR bit on this thing is still at this company. And I have letters because I'm trying to find the original artist because it went on a 13-city show. They didn't drive it to the 13 cities, I don't think, but they got it to certain cities, including that thing in New Mexico where they have the balloons, all the colorful hot air balloons. And it looks like basically it fits right in because they're all really decorated. And they had a big food drive there. And the last one was somewhere in Ohio, Columbus or Cleveland. And there was a contest for someone who won, giving the most food to the food drive or something, contest in a contest, and you would win the bus.
Wow.
Hence it being the whole Jerry bit. Now, I keep reading, and there's more stuff just keeps coming up. As it ends up, the couple that bought it had a small child or two small kids, and it was just not practical. So the guy says one of his friends said, hey, or maybe it was the wife, one of her friends said, you ought to try to get Discover just to buy it back from you. Get the money, whatever it's worth, and buy yourself a family car, you know. So then if they bought some Honda something or other, some new car, they had enough money to do that. And the bus went for sale, but they had trouble selling it. And I don't know when this was, but it was probably still in the 80s. Oh, no. It wasn't the 80s. I have to be careful here. It was in the 90s because Garcia died in 96, I think.
Yeah.
Or 98, and this thing went down the next year. So that's why I need to talk to the advertising agency to see if they actually did the thing with Garcia and then he died and they just kept doing it or what, I don't know. But they couldn't sell it, so they took the paint off it. They ruined the $1 million photo. They took the stuff off. The only good news is whoever repainted it did a 97-point job on it, painting it back mango green and gray. And the interior was never touched. Still to this day is untouched and still smells and looks new, even though it has, 20,000 miles on it now. So I figure I'm going to buy it. I call the guy up because the last guy from the ad is this guy named Johnson, Chris Johnson, I think. I thought, wait a second, I remember Chris Johnson calling me 10 years ago because he found me because I was one of the owners. So I talked to this guy a couple times because he asked me if I had the logo from the front, the VW badge. And I said, no. I said, I didn't even remember it. And he goes, well, someone said that you said it got stolen at the Miami airport. And I said, actually, I don't know where it was stolen. I said, I went to Miami with it and I came back. And a couple days later, someone told me that it was missing. So I didn't know if someone stole it off my street or if it was stolen in Miami, because when I drove in, I parked it. I didn't walk to the front of it. I didn't see it. So that's how I talked to this guy. So now I'm going to call him back. Now I got to play dumb. Because, of course, if he knows I want it, he's going to hold out to 65 G's. So I said, Chris, this is Kevin Jeannette. Of course, he remembered me like it was we talked yesterday. He goes, hey, man, did you see my ad? And I said, I didn't see it. Someone told me about it. He goes, that's pretty cool, man. This thing needs to go back to you. Like he wouldn't be saying that.
Wow.
And I said, well, tell me more about it. He goes, well, this and that. And then he finally says something about Jerry Garcia. And I'm thinking to myself the whole time, why didn't he promote it as a Discover card promotion for Jerry Garcia, blah, 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 blah? Why didn't he start the ad out? This was just a couple years ago when I bought it. Talk about missing the point. So we talked a little bit, and he goes, well, I really need to sell it. And I said, what's your drop-dead price? He goes, well, says, I'm having trouble getting the 60. It must have been 60 because I got it for 50. And he said, I'll knock 10 off it. So I didn't tell him I already saw it. He didn't ask because I didn't want to lie to him that, well, I read everything about it, now I want it back. But I ended up back with the damn thing, and now I discover that at Haight and Ashbury Streets is where they started the whole promo, and the dude that started it and gave it away after the whole summer of traveling through the United States was this guy they call Wavy Gravy.
Wow.
And you already then now know, because no millennial knows who Wavy Gravy is, sorry millennials out there, that he was the MC at Woodstock. And there are pictures of him wearing the women in the advertising agency and others, I'm sure, and the men and others, I'm sure, meaning other people on the tour and whatnot, all got Jerry Garcia artwork, scarves, and ties. And the dude, this Chris Johnson guy, was able to round up all the stuff and all the photos and talk with the advertising agency and got the hard copies, negatives, whatever, from some of the promos, blah, blah, blah. And he still never ran anything on what he knew about this thing. The second I bought it, is God is my witness, it's got to be a $200,000 bus.
Wow.
They've sold for $250,000, but those are the 23-window Sambas, you know, the super fancy ones. But how could a 23-window Samba outdo a Jerry Garcia artwork, even though the artwork isn't on it now, but all the other stuff that goes, you know, with the car? So I am now currently trying to find the artist who still lives today who painted it. And I'm going to pay him whatever it takes to get him to repaint it. Because everybody that comes in and I tell this story, it took so long story, they all go, why is it still here? Why haven't you put that hippie thing back on it? You could take this to Monterey. Oh, my God, what would it sell for there? And I go, I don't want to sell it. I made the mistake once, but if I didn't make the mistake, all this would have never happened. So 2 months ago, I Google on a Sunday, like this morning, I Google wavy gravy, and the dude is up and around 70-something years old, living in San Francisco, because he's from New York. He lives in San Francisco and does promos left and right, as you can imagine, to all us, baby boomers. And I called his manager up. And I told him the unabashed story. The guy goes, he would love to do it. And I said, I know this doesn't, come free. So he goes, well, what do you need? And I said, well, I need Wavy Gravy to show up because when I get it painted, I want him to, get promo, this and that, and blah, blah, blah. He says, I'll talk to him. He says, undoubtedly, it's not a long drive for him to get here to do it. He goes, what do you want? I said, first of all, this is not for Discover Card. I'm just a normal guy that ended up with it, crazy enough that I owned it once. Now I'm smart enough to get the artist to repaint it, and I'd like to reintroduce it in Monterey at the Historics and have it all start at Haight-Ashbury, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, okay, well, I'll talk to him. You tell me what you think it's worth. I said, no, you tell me. I said, I know this isn't going to be a $500 deal. I said, I'm a grown-up. I said, just come back to me when you talk to him. I said, it can be any time after Christmas because that's when I plan on, getting the thing done. And he goes, okay, man. He says, I'm sure we can do it. He says, let's keep in touch, and we'll do it. So anyway, now I'm going online to see, and I then meet a guy that's another BMW guy that his daughter was married at Haight and Ashbury, or well, blah, 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 so on and on it goes. So that's my story of my little Volkswagen bus. However we got onto that, I apologize.
Wow, no, this is brilliant. This is great stuff. Well, let's kick off with our shared home stateness. Tell me about where you grew up specifically, and whether you were part of a car family, or how cars and racing and this certain German brand that you've come to spend most of your life in and around, where those intersections came together.
Okay, born and raised in Southern California. I was born in Long Beach and was raised in a little town kind of close to Long Beach called Bellflower, California. And to put it in location, it's close to Cerritos, which is the edge of L.A. County to Orange County. It's close to Beach Town, 17 miles from the beach. I went to Downey High School. The lead singer of Metallica, Mike, Joe, Jim, Billy Bob, whatever his name is, went to the same high school a few years back. So that was kind of the area that I grew up in, but it also was close to Bellflower Boulevard, which was, any of the local people knew that it was really one of the, places to, do your cruising. Of course, we had Whittier Boulevard, which is in Whittier, which is where Nixon went to college, and let's say John Lasseter of Pixar went to Whittier, and Whittier College. My wife went to Whittier College. So all close, and then of course we had Southgate. There was Tweedy Boulevard, which was also another touring, and Firestone Boulevard, where there was a Firestone plant where Harvey's Broiler was, which is something that American Graffiti was kind of styled after. You know, the whole drive up restaurant. Harvey's was, you could Google it and see how famous it was in the day. And it wasn't so much the lowrider scene then yet. They were custom cars, not essay wagons. I say that to all my Mexican friends out there because I'm part Mexican. And it was really a car show-off. Any night was a Cars and Coffee, but forget the coffee. Although you would go to Winsel's Donuts or some of the other little restaurants, Harvey's Broiler there, a Tweety, there were other places. But you could do all these cruise things on Friday was the big night. Saturday was more of a family kind of a night. I know that sounds weird, but you would take, your kids with you and go to the Broiler or whatnot, the drive-in. So as my family was young, my father passed away when I was 459-ish, and he had a Ford pickup truck. And my mom sold that and bought, of all things, there were 6 kids in the family now, I'm the last of 6, bought a Triumph TR2.
Nice.
Needless to say, my mother worked various jobs because, she was a housewife while my father was alive. And my father had his own orchestra as his part-time job. And my mother was a singer, like I say this again, maybe as younger people won't know what the Andrews sisters were, but their parents would. And that was a trio of sisters that sang, during World War II, blah, blah, blah. This was all World War II time when my mom and dad met. So he met her singing on the stage, and he was the band behind her. So always into music, my family. So my mother, after he died, took a job at a radio station in Signal Hill. Signal Hill, for anybody listening to this thing from the Long Beach area, would know of Airplane Hill. And Airplane Hill was, there's all these oil derricks on Signal Hill. That was the glory for the oil fields in Southern California. Yeah. Is Signal Hill, Signal Oil. And they call it because the whole top of the mountain was full of oil derricks and oil pumps and all these crazy things up on there. So it's just basically a refinery. It wasn't, when I say a hill, it was its own little city, but it was basically this one mountain that just sticks out there, which you could Google it right now and still see it. And over, you can see them from the top, Long Beach Harbor, Seal Beach Harbor and all these other harbors. And there was a naval yard there, San Pedro, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, she takes this job as a disc jockey. And she did it part-time, maybe Friday and Saturday or Friday and Sunday nights or something, because she had 6 kids at home. Yeah. And it was Jazz with Judy. Wow. And if you were into jazz, you were into sports cars. And that's what we called them back then. They were all just called sports cars. And if you were into sports cars, you were into jazz, okay? Rock and roll was a whole different beat, but jazz was pretty hip stuff, in these days. It was, beatniks, the start of all kinds of revolutions that ended up, being in your neck of the woods in San Francisco, of course. So the TR2 had more meaning than maybe my mother just, said, okay, enough of the kids, we're going to do something that's cool. And my oldest brother at the time was 19, and he got to drive it. And that's kind of the start of the car scene. And we had a 49 Ford Woody wagon, which is just a regular steel wagon. They bolted on real wood, though, on the sides. I'm sure you know what a 49 and a 50 Ford wagon looks like. And we had that, but it was long in the tooth. And my mom traded that for a 59 Beetle convertible.
What? Your mom was pretty cool.
My mom was the coolest, okay? So my introduction to cars was my oldest brother, Patrick, they're all still in the Orange County area. He would take it and go to, we called back then, slaloms and or rallies. A rally and a slalom are a little different today than they were yesterday, or different yesterday than they are today. The rally would be something you'd go on a Saturday night, and they would get lime and dunk it on a curb somewhere, and you got a direction sheet as to where to go, and you had your clock, and you would try to get to each little checkpoint, and the checkpoints were a restaurant of this, and I'm sure in those days you'd grab a beer at the checkpoint. And Jazz Car was this club that my family was in, or Jazz Car or Jazz Club. I think it was Jazz Car, which was derived from Jazz Club. And Jazz Car, from all the really cool people in the Southern California, Southern LA area who were into cars and jazz, were in this, and lots of really cool cars, Speedsters, Gullwings, T-Birds, all the cars of that time were involved in this bit. So I would get to go, or my sister, a couple years older than me, or one of the other siblings, would get to go in the VW when my brother would take it on a rally. And I was little enough that I was behind the back seat.
Wow.
And in a VW, that seat would fold forward. I could be in that back seat. And we would do this rally thing. And at the end, if you couldn't find your way, you got a book of matches that was sealed. And if you couldn't find your way to the last checkpoint, you'd open this match up, and it would say turn right on Alondra or left on, this street or wherever, to end up where you would meet. And typically, it was at someone's house. And Sleepy Stein, another big name for jazz, he might have even owned the radio station. He had this really cool house in some valley somewhere. I don't even know where. But, you drive around for a couple hours, at night trying to find the place where you would go for this party, and then you would have a party. And we were fortunate that it wasn't really a kid thing, but because my mother was a disc jockey at the station, that we got to go too. And then we did these things called the Desert Gig, which in the summertime at Lake El Mirage, they would set up a slalom course, and you would take your sports car out there, and they'd put cones out or something, and that's where I was introduced to Speedsters and GT Speedsters and Gullwings, all these really cool cars that these guys would take. And I'm just a kid. So that was kind of the intro. And skip time, first car I ever drove was that 59 Beetle, because every sibling got it until my mom finally traded in for a 1964 Buick Special, a new car, which is, I think, the first new car that she had ever purchased. And the car disappeared at that point. But I stole the car one afternoon in the summertime. My mom kept a key in her jewelry box, and my mom worked. My sister was driving it at the time, so it was basically my sister's car, who is the second oldest in the family. But she worked at the Alpha Beta, which people out west knew that was a supermarket.
Yep.
Yeah, that like Publix or any of the big name supermarkets. And when I was so stupid enough to not know that from the front of our house where the Volkswagen was parked to the windows of the front of the Alpha Beta were only about a quarter mile away. And if she was a checker, so if she looked out the window, she could see the little red Beetle there or not there. And when I would take it, I would drive it around the neighborhood with buddies. I mean, I think I must have been 11 or 12 the first time I took it. And I already knew how to drive it because my brothers showed me how to drive it while it just sat in the driveway. I could shift it, and I knew I could drive it. And I did. And I took it who knows how many times for joyrides in the summertime. And my sister, bless her soul, because she passed away a couple years ago, about 5 years ago, we had a Christmas gig at my brother's house in Newport Beach. And she said, I know everything about you. And I said, cool, you're my big sister, you should. And we had the internet now. I said, anybody can read about me, go be my guest. And she said, no, everything. I go, you don't know everything, but what do you know why you brought this up? She goes, like all the times you stole my car. I said, you are kidding. She goes, you're such a dumb shit. You never looked over to see if I could see. I don't know if drive it away, but the car was either there or it wasn't there. Who could have taken it? You were the only one home. And I went, wow, how cool are you? Because Mom never told me. My mom died in 92, so of course she was long gone by that time. I said, you never say anything to Mom? She goes, nah, I figured I'd just leave it alone and someday I'd surprise you. So how cool was my sister? So I, right now, am having, because I don't have time, although I'm restoring a 1953 VW right now, I'm having a 59 Inca Red Beetle convertible restored by Classic VWs in Fullerton, California, Orange County. I'm having it redone, and I'm going to send it to my brother in Orange City, Orange, California. And he's going to be the first one to get it, and then Brian, the architect in Newport, gets it, and then Darius and Temecula will get it, and my sister and Huntington Beach will get it, and then I'll ship it home. So
awesome.
That's how I got started in the cars. But we had a bicycle ride, Moon Equipment, a bicycle ride, Jeans Chrome, which there was a painter there, this guy named Larry Watson, and Jeans Chrome was like the #1 seller for Krager wheels. We rode our bikes to Krager. We rode our bikes to Bell Helmets in Maywood Bell and Bell, California, which is where Krager started, was also local. We had Barris that then moved to Downey after his shop burnt down. We had the car guys of car guys, Laszlo, who painted, you name it, was all a bicycle ride for all us little kids. And as we got older, it was just, we were just car guys, and me especially because of the jazz car thing with all the sports cars. My brother then egged it on with the rallying, and then the Orange County bug-in, and everybody got a bug. And then in 66-ish, my sister Michelle, the one that used to watch me steal her car, bought a 1964 356C.
Wow.
And at that point, Houston, ain't no problem here. She let me change the muffler, because I'm already working on mini bikes and go-karts and bicycles and stuff like this. Never worked on a car. Well, I did work on a car. A friend of mine, 2 years older than me, got a VW, a 56 Beetle, and his dad said if he rebuilt the engine and transmission, painted it, his dad would pay for everything. But the kid had to do it. And I had all the tools. So I kind of helped John with his Beetle. So I kind of knew mechanical stuff working on cars. It was actually the first car I ever worked on. And then my sister wanted or needed a new exhaust on her Porsche. And she said, could you put a new muffler on my car? I said, Michelle, it's just a Volkswagen that looks like a pancake. And she goes, well, not really, but if you think you can put the muffler on, let's go get one, we'll put it on. She drove me to Circle Motors, which is still there today, and I know the current owner of Circle Motors in Lakewood, Long Beach, at the Circle, the traffic circle, the only one in California at the time. And we bought a new Bursch exhaust. And the Bursch exhaust to this day is the coolest exhaust ever made for a 356 because of the glass pack. I talked to the gentleman who started Bursch and is still there today. Can't get that glass pack anymore, or cherry bomb as we called it. And it had a distinctive sound that anybody that knew anything in the 356 world going into the later 70s, because then he couldn't get that glass back anymore, which he told me a story a couple years ago that he bought them from the surplus, some Army surplus, and he paid $0.25 a piece for them. He got like 5,000 of them for $0.25 a piece, and that's why he used them on this little header that he made for a Porsche, because some dragster guy wanted to drag race one, and he said, hey, man, you're a welder, make me a set of headers for it. And that's how Bursch kind of got started in a roundabout way. I'm sure you could Google Bursch and get the real story, but that's what he told me. So anyway, at that point, when I changed that muffler, I was a Porsche mechanic for life. In 66 to 67, whenever this thing transpired, if I was born in 53, do the math as to how old I was.
Wow.
And then from that point on,
and from
I'm the Porsche guy.
And from that point on, yeah, good Lord.
So in high school, when I went to high school, now I'm already working on everybody's Volkswagen. I mean, I'm 12 and 13 years old, and I'm the VW tuner in town. And when I got to high school in the 10th grade, one of my friends in school, Daria and Doris, what were their last names? Anyway, their older brother was a teacher at Warren High School, which was the rival high school for us at Downey High School. And he had a 912. And in the 10th grade, he didn't have the money to fix it, but it needed a valve job. And the sisters said, I was a mechanic. And I worked on this car. So that was really the first, current 900 series body car. It was still a 4-cylinder motor. And I rebuilt the engine. And I thought to myself, oh, my God, this is... Because it was like a Volkswagen motor, but I had to get a special 10-millimeter Allen wrench to take the heads off. And there was a auto parts store that sold import auto parts. So other than going to the dealer, I could go, on a 10-minute bike ride because I didn't have a car, and I could buy parts, and so I started working on. Then there was a friend at my high school.
Had you worked on engines and torn them down before? Because
Volkswagens, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and they're the same guy invented them both, if you remember.
No, I'm just saying at that age, it's just a little crazy to think that someone's not only rebuilding engines, but understands setting, getting everything set, getting, hey.
Clymer already made the book.
Wow. Okay.
So it was easy. You got the Clymer's 356. I forget. I looked at that book. I wore the pages out in the beginning. But yeah, there were books, and I was smart enough, and there were libraries. So at Christmas, one of my brothers would buy me a how-to VW book, and then they came out with the How to Hot Rod a Volkswagen, and we were going to the drags at Lyons Drag Strip, and then Orange County and Pomona. This is all the stuff. Pomona was a little tough bike ride, but Lyons was easy, and Orange County was a little tough. But older friends already had cars, so we were at the drags every weekend. And then my mom was doing some rally or some jazz car thing, which didn't involve going straight. All the sports cars went fast left and right. So the best Volkswagen story, which might be the biggest star for me, is my oldest brother took my sister and I to Riverside. And back then it was side streets to Riverside. From where we were, on the 405 freeway to the 91, it was probably just less than an hour. But back in the day, it was, an hour and 45, because you'd have to take, Imperial, which I forget what the hell they call that, one long road, and then this and then that to get there. But I remember pulling up and seeing at 7 or 7A, 7 or 7 and 8. I forget. God, I even raced it at Riverside. But there was a hill between 6 and 7, and there was a black going, sitting up high on the property at the track, and the doors were open.
Wow.
And I don't know how old I was, but I was still able to fit in the back of this Beetle. And I saw that, and it changed my life.
Really?
I could not, but I asked my brother, I said, what is that? My brother was young too, but he knew what a 300 SL was. He goes, that's what they call a gull wing. And I said, what's sticking up? He goes, those are the doors. I said, I never saw doors open like that as a long Googling kid, He goes, that's why that car's so cool. He probably told me why that car's probably worth $7,000, or something like that. But that was the biggest thing that made me think cars were cool. And then, of course, it was, some years later that my sister and everything else was introduced. So that's so I grew up in this giant melting pot of cars. I mean, people talk about everything we did was cars, or on the weekend it was riding our bikes to one of the shops to get what we called a decal. They're not decals anymore, they're stickers, but in the day you would say, hey, you got any decals? And we would jump on bikes, and that's what we did. Half a Saturday, every Saturday, we rode our bike to some cool shop and bugged the shit out of whoever owned the shop. Here come those asshole kids again, So here I am now, an old guy, and talking to you, man.
So where does motor racing, your transformation into working pit lane, crew chief, chief mechanic, where does that intersection start? What kind of year and what kind of cars do you take this cool upbringing and a lot of the self-taught automotive expertise and say, okay, I need to crew chief a Porsche here, or I need to go to an IMSA race there? Where did all that kick off for you?
Probably at the bug end. Google the bug end. It's, to this day, it was still the largest, the best. There's things in history that can never be duped, and the bug end was the first, really, because Southern California was the absolute melting pot for anything Volkswagen. Period. Anything Volkswagen. Dune buggy, this, that. The Baja came from people from Orange County. Blah blah. Everything. Going around. Dune buggy racing and whatnot was really Orange County and the Orange County International Raceway. So in 71-ish, one of my high school buddies, who's a year older than me, I know he was out of school, and I might have still been in school, and I graduated in 71. So if it was the summer of 71, just out of school, but he entered a contest at the Bug Inn. It was the first ever engine pulling contest. And you entered it was a contest in a contest. You wrote in from an application out of Hot V-Dubs magazine, or you wrote a letter to the editor and you say, hey, I want to enter it. And you had to provide a 1968 Beetle, which of course is the first Beetle, to have 4 lugs instead of the white 5. It had the big chrome bumpers instead of the little overrider bumpers. It's the later, newer style Beetle, They all wanted them to be the same. So everybody had the same chance and the same time thing to get the motor in and out. So he enters the contest, and he actually wins the contest, meaning he gets an entry. Little did we know of the 8 guys that were there. It was probably the only 8 that signed up.
Wow.
But it was a big deal. So the premise is you got to take the motor out of the car, and you got to take it over a line so far away, and then go back, put it back in the car, then drive the car back to the line that you'd carried the motor over.
That's a hell of a competition.
In the width of one of the left lane, okay? So, and this bug-in produced plenty of people. And this was the first time people were going to see us. I'm sure they were thinking, I don't have an hour to watch this. But it wasn't going to be an hour. But they filled the stands on the dragway, each side. And it was just down one side, 8 cars parked. It was, I think
wow.
it might have been 6. 8.
This sounds so cool.
4 pros and 4 amateurs, or 3 amateurs, or 4 pros and 3 amateurs, however many it was. Again, I have the Hot VW magazine, and I talked to someone about it yesterday. Now I need to find it to actually try to remember what happened 40-something years ago. So we worked never together, Leon and I. Leon Desimone, my good pal, still to this day, and he races at Monterey Historics every year with something really cool. We were mechanic guys. We grew up together. We stole hubcaps together, blah, 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 blah. But we never did it together. He did it at his house. I did it at my house. We helped it. But we never did anything. You take the bottom, I'll take the top, okay? Because I had other friends locally that if I needed help, hey, man, coming over, I'm going to dump the engine out of a 63 or whatever. So now here we are at the Bug Inn, and Leon and I are entered. And all these pros show up with their blue Volkswagen shirts because they're all dealer guys. They have the Volkswagen logo on it. And me and Leon show up with holes in our Levi's and a T-shirt that says Weber Surfboards on it or something. Because we were surfers too. So, okay, fine. The other amateur guys have taken coffee cans and snipped an edge on them so they could hang them on the bumper to put the hardware from the motor in so they don't lose it. Because the rule was there were technicians from VOA. And for all you guys and girls out there that don't know, VOA is Volkswagen of America. And they were the guys who were going to inspect the Beetles before to make sure everything was tight.
Yep.
Because, of course, we could leave all the nuts loose on the car that we brought. Only they didn't even do that. I mean, they checked them for tightness, but they switched them around, so we didn't get to work on our Volkswagen. But the 68 Beetles were pretty new, as you can imagine, still just in the early 70s for this bug, and the 68 was still a pretty new car, and they were all in great shape. So here are all these different color Volkswagens all lined up, and the contest starts. Leon and I get the engine out quicker than anybody. Now remember, we've never worked together, but he's done it 100 times and I've done it 200 times. The only problem is we didn't get the car high enough off the ground. Because you were entitled hand tools, 2 floor jacks, and a regular, I don't mean floor jacks, I mean jack stands.
Yeah.
2 jack stands and 1 floor jack. So, okay, fine. Well, we jacked it up enough where it looked like we could get the engine out, and bingo, there we went, because you were in a hurry. So we had the motor out in a couple minutes. Bang! Down the jack it goes. Only problem is the car wasn't high enough to get the engine out with it on the jack. We're talking, finally, we put the motor on the ground. I pulled the jack out, and we're both, you can imagine, I mean, the motor's not light, but it's also not that heavy. And they all had to be stock, so it had the 2 round tailpipes, so you could grab those. And we're still trying to drag the motor out, and it's hitting the back apron by an inch.
Mm.
And you could tilt the engine up, but then the carburetor hit, or something then kept hitting it. So Leon says, let me straddle the motor. I'll lift the car up. You drag it between my legs. And I thought to myself, this will be interesting. And he lifted the car up by himself, and I dragged the engine out. And I'm going for the jack to put it on the jack, because by now the pro guys are already starting to head this width of the track to the white line that's, separates the spectator wall to the spectators that are filled. The stands are filled. And they're going nuts. Talk about what changed my mind, what made me think this is cool. All you could hear were the people yelling and screaming, because this was a real act of pleasure for these guys watching these mechanics fumble this around.
Wow.
Leon says, let's just pick it up and run with it. We picked the engine up, and we ran across the line, passing 2 or 3 of the guys that were ahead of us because we couldn't get the engine out of the car. And we ran it back, and when we lifted that motor up, talk about a life-changing roar. The crowds went nuts because we're physically lifting the motor. It's not dripping oil because they didn't leak oil. You didn't have to drain the oil out of it. Back we go, the width of the track, and back we go. And then I probably got on my butt, and I think I kicked the motor back under when Leon lifted the car back up. We tilted the motor, put the jack under it. I think we still finished second behind a pro. But if I'm wrong, the time was that they gave us was the pros won it in, 6 or 7 minutes, and they said we finished second in 13 minutes. But we really did it in 8 minutes because we timed it too. And I remember calling Hot VW saying, hey, you got the time wrong. How could we have finished second with that time when guys had a quicker timer? There was something that was messed up, and it always bothered me that we did it quicker than everybody else. But the moment of being here was the crowd. So at that point, I always knew I was going to, my brothers and sisters seemed to be pretty book smart, and I had mechanical common sense, and I might not have been the sharpest tool in the shed at that point, because I didn't think I needed to be, because I knew I was going to be a mechanic. And I was smart enough to want to be a Porsche mechanic. So as it was easy to be working on my sister's car, and then the 912, and then the 356 Super 90 that I worked on, It was easy for me to think I could be what people knew as a grease monkey back then, which was working on Chevrolets, or, we didn't have Datsuns and Toyotas at that point yet, although I think they started to come abroad. But I kind of figured if I was going to be a mechanic, I was going to be, a classy mechanic, a cool mechanic, work on cool cars. So I always thought, if I could, rather than tell people I'm a mechanic, I could tell people I'm a Porsche mechanic. And I milked that feeling and that statement right up to opening my first shop in 1975 in Laguna Niguel, which is the outskirts of Orange County, still in Orange County. And I named it Service Porsche because that's what I did. I serviced Porsches. And
I like that, very
Porsche
literal.
took the name. What's that?
I like that, very literal.
Yeah, and I figured it was easy to come up with that because it's what I did. So I was 21 years old, I think, 22, and opened it up. And at that point, this guy came screaming down the street. The street I lived on was just up from the Mission San Juan Capistrano in Capistrano Beach.
Mm-hmm.
It was a dead-end street. And this guy comes barreling down the street. And it was kind of like a natural back then. Laguna Hills and stuff didn't have houses all over them. So there was railroad tracks by us where the Amtrak to San Clemente went and stopped at San Juan Capistrano, the Mission. There was a train, little depot there in town. And all really cool Southern California, cool, old school type stuff. And this guy comes racing down the street in a speedster. And I look at the black speedster, I go, man, that's cool, man. Because speedsters were cool. And he comes to my shop. And the sign said service, and then Porsche Volkswagen. Or I might have said Porsche Volkswagen because I was smart enough to know that Porsche would be a better heading. But I might have been embarrassed enough, not knowing that much about Porsches, that I might have said Volkswagen Porsche. I have to look at my old sign photos and see what that said. But he then said, "You work on these?" Just yelling over the top of this, and it had a burst exhaust on it, whom, whom, whom. And I go, yeah. And at the time, I was color sanding a 61 Super 90 Roadster because I became a painter too back then. Because I couldn't buy a paint job, so I had to learn how to paint too. So I was color sanding a black Super 90 Roadster that I refit with alloy wheels. No one had ever seen a 356 with Porsche alloys on it. But I thought it would be cool, so I drilled the drums for alloys and made them fit. And he said, "I like those alloys." And I said, "Thanks, man." He goes, "You can work on this thing?" And I said, "Yeah, hell yes." Of course, it was a 356, so I could. He had 5 of them. And he had just got the new 76 Turbo Carrera. OMG. This is my newest best friend. At one point, he came by the shop. I was working on all his cars now. He was from Florida, and he had a house up the Ortega Highway. You can Google that. It's like Mulholland for the Hollywood guys, for the Orange County guys. Jeff Zwart and all his company and me in the day, everybody knows the Ortega Highway. It goes from Mission San Juan Capistrano to Lake Elsinore. Don't need to tell you about Elsinore and Steve McQueen. So that was the road that did it. He lived up there. Well, he came down one time and he said, "You know what a 934 is?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You know what a 934.5 is?" And I did not know what it was. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I just bought one." And I thought to myself, this guy must be the biggest bullshitter that I ever met. Although owning 4 or 5 speedsters and a Turbo Carrera, I figured he must have money. He did. He bought the last 934.5 from Vasek Wollek.
Wow.
And I went and looked at it. And I couldn't believe he was telling me the truth. And he said, "You can go there and look at it." He says, "Hell, I might even let you work on it." And I thought to myself, oh my God, I don't know if I slept the next month before the car actually came to my shop in Laguna. And I have photos to prove it. At that point, I had already done what they call POC, Porsche Owners Club, had events at Ontario and Riverside, and I was already racing go-karts. And I thought to myself, I am now going to be a racing mechanic. And you always wonder different people that introduce you in your lifetime to certain things, whether it's a coincidence or someone that you meet or something that you see or a book that you read or something you hear on radio or watch on TV. You know, he was the responsible guy that made me get to that step, although it was my destiny to be a Porsche racing mechanic, and I was already into, you know, getting racing parts from Pollock and things like that, because it was, you know, a 45-minute drive up the coast for me in Redondo Beach, or Hermosa, or whatever you want to call it up there, Manhattan. But he brought that destiny, and the car came down, and I went to the first race with it at Road Atlanta. First time I ever left the state other than leaving to go to the Colorado River in Arizona or going surfing in Mexico. I flew to Atlanta and was a mechanic on that car, of which I ended up owning and sold recently to David McNeil of WeatherTech. So it's you know, how things cross and change. So Cliff Kearns is my kind of start into the deal. And at that point, of course, I hooked up with the Whittingtons because they were in Florida, and I was an engine guy and a painter. So guys wanted me on their team because I could do multiple tasks, and they didn't need to farm something out. I could fix the cars right at the track. So I became a needed commodity for the racing guys that knew what I did, and that's where I met Jerry Sutterfield, who is a local Porsche agency, and he would sell the Whittingtons their Porsches and help them get the 935s from Porsche, because he's the first guy to buy a 917 privately from Porsche in the afterworld.
Wow.
He bought two 917s through Jürgen Barth, and Otis Chandler, or Oates as we called him in the day, whose family owned the Los Angeles Times, got one, which is now McCall's car, and Jerry got one. And Chris McAllister owns it today. Jerry is the godfather of historic Porsche racing in the world. He's the guy that brought everything to fruition on historic Porsches. And I came because he hired me when I wasn't working for Whittington, you know, doing the races. He had done a deal, again, with Jürgen Barth at Porsche to restore a 908 Longtail. And the 908 deal was he borrowed the museum factory. It's there today in the new museum, the number 64 car. He borrowed the car, made the deal with Barth, because he had a 908, which I recently restored for Miles Collier that you saw at the Monterey Historic Races, that my son Gunnar drove, that green-nosed Spa-winning car. Sutterfield bought that chassis somewhere in Europe. He actually bought two of them, and one went to Joe Pendergast, Tim Pendergast's father, and the one that he built from parts. And that's when I really got into Pollock, because Pollock got everything from Porsche, all the old Porsche racing parts. So I would go back home, because now I'm moving to Florida because it's 1980, even though I was coming here since the 70s because of Cliff O and Sebring and Daytona and then the Whittingtons. So I restored with Jerry's kids. He had two sons and a daughter who all pitched in to help this 908 Longtail that's in the museum to this day, to get the body molds from it so we could make parts for the 908 Longtail that Andy and I, who's still with me today, put together for Jerry Sutterfield, who sold it while we were doing it to Miles Collier.
Crazy.
As it ends up, the restoration that we did back then, in 33 years ago, 1980, or early 81, I guess, we did it as best we could with bodywork that we were able to get. Jerry actually had it made. I didn't make it, although I had to fit it to the car. It was a Spider, because most coupes were made into Spiders, and we had to make the frames to hold the windows up in the Longtail frame, and blah, 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 all the stuff by prints that Porsche gave, that Barth got from Porsche for Sutterfield. And we did that car. We only recently re-restored it because the methodology of restoration of these cars now has totally changed to make them the way Porsche did it, meaning leaving little drips and resin. I mean, they made them so fast they were used as tools. They weren't show cars.
Yeah.
And they were built to go fast. So we restore our racing Porsches now that way. But that's where I got the lead in to doing the historic stuff. Even though I was restoring cars in Southern California at the Porsche shop, I then, Sutterfield was the key for me to get involved in the restoration of the racing stuff, even though by now I'm already painting what we would call a historic car today in the day, because I'm fixing crash 934s and RSRs and 935s. And that's then when I met, through that whole deal, Marty Hines, who passed away the historic weekend, this historics in Monterey,
Yeah.
and Preston Henn, because all these guys were down here racing. I'm not going to tell anybody what they all did, except I know Preston Henn has always owned and run the biggest flea market in the world, and he raced boats and raced cars too. So again, it was easy for me because they could hire a few less guys. So I would do everybody I could. I was this guy's crew chief one weekend and that guy's crew chief the other weekend, and I had engines to build and blah, 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 blah. And through that whole mecca, meeting everybody in the business, the Jerry Woods in the business, who, of course, are from your neck of the woods, and, all the guys, Franz Blom, their guys, of course, the Andile guys were all friends, from the day in Southern California when they started Andile in 1975 also. So, one thing just led to another, but it's back to climbing the ladder. And, who's up on top of the ladder while the other guys are falling off. So at this point, I'm not at the top, and I don't want to get to the top, but I'm still doing it. And I'm active because I love doing this. I still am the engine guy. I'm still the painter, although I've been very fortunate that my daughter, Jessie, has married a college graduate, but in business, who lost his job in the real estate banking, and I offered him a job before he could get another job, and he's just painted one of Diego Feebly's Brumos RSR for the big Brumos car show, car class, that in fact Franchitti is going to judge. Dario Franchitti is going to judge it at Amelia Island in March at 17. So anyway, so now we're another generation's pop. Of course, Gunnar's a race car driver. Probably never ever destined or wanted to be a mechanic, which is fine by me. Jessie would have been a great mechanic, but I wasn't going to, force that on her. But so now that gets me to Florida and pick your next line.
Well, let's bounce around a little bit here because there's such fun stuff to talk about. So the highlight reel would be winning the first race for the Porsche 962. The fun part, which I would love,
that is a highlight, but not my highlight.
Well, but for Porsche fans, for prototype fans, that's a big deal. What I would love to hear some stories about is not only how that program came together, but the rather insane combination of one A.J. Foyt and Bob Wollek. Good Lord, as a crew chief trying to run a racing team, having two people with massively different personalities and outlooks on life. I don't know where to start, brother, but I can't imagine what that must have been like to try and turn into an effective racing program.
It's definitely a cool part of my life because, again, some of the younger generation, might not know the name A.J. Foyt or Mario Andretti, which you would expect in America, and definitely don't know who Bob Wollek was. But for what you just said, you have to throw in the missing link, and that's dealing with the guy who had the insight, the foresight, the hindsight, the tell-sight, and that's Preston Henn, because talk about Barnum and Bailey of PR for anything to do with race cars, and I've been called that too by our friend Heindorf and company, on the Le Mans radio.
Yeah.
From the circus ringleader for some of the stunts that I've done in my day, and having been able to have an open personality, being from Southern California, coming to the East Coast, I'd like to think there's a little bit of a different kind of a person that comes out of there, and the East Coast people today might think there's not, and maybe today there isn't, but in the day, you were a different breed coming from Southern California. So for me, I was open-minded on everything. Nothing bothered me. I mean, I tried to keep things in tune, in line to being legal, but I'd try anything. But now, let me be around Preston Henn, the god of show. So when we were fumbling around racing, I was the chick dude. I had Desiree Wilson, I think the only female ever to win a sanctioned Formula One race.
Yeah.
And then Preston's daughter, Bonnie Henn. And I was... You want to throw in a 512 Ferrari and all this, too, helping Al Lager, who is the Ferrari guy, and then he would invite Andy and me into the the destruction of racing a weekend somewhere in Florida. That's a nucleus for either excitement or trouble. But we raced 935s for a couple of years, just the normal ones, and again. The 512, we went to Le Mans with it in '82. So first time for me at Le Mans was in a 512, a BB. I don't want to make it sound like it's a 512 like a car that raced against the 917. It wasn't. It's the later one. But it was exciting to say the least. And I always told Preston, all the show you get having your daughter in the car, and then Desiree Wilson and us racing across the country, with the girls in the big old 935 was always big PR for him. And the swap shop, and he liked it and enjoyed it, and he'd drive, and we get various drivers in the car, and I finally convinced him, if you ever gave us something current, we could win races. He'd always say, we win a race when we get on the paper, in the front page of the paper. We win a race when we're interviewed. We win a race because of our paint jobs. Blah 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 blah. So keep in mind that I'm the engine builder, the transmission builder, the boss of the team. Andy does everything else on the team, all the electrical, the plumbing, the wiring, the body fit, the this and that, helps me paint, and all the crap. And then we're either driving the cars there, because in the day, you had a truck and a trailer, all the stuff that we did, including then being the boss and the parts ordering guy and having a young family, So for me, it was... hell on wheels. I didn't know if I was coming or going, but enjoyed every minute of it. But I wanted a new car. Andile had just made what we call their Moby Dick car, because it renders the famous Moby Dick Martini Longtail 935. Preston nicknamed it the Moby Dick because when he saw it, when I said, we need to buy this, he said, it looks like Moby Dick. And I said, yeah, it's cooler than Moby Dick. It's Glenn Blakely built, Drino Miller, Alvin, Dieter, and Arnold from Andile. This is magic car.
So is this 78, 79?
We got the car in 82.
Okay.
So they built the car in 81, I think. They had partnered with Howard Meister, who owned the local Porsche agency in Orange County. And Meister... I don't know if he owned the dealership. Maybe he ended up owning it later, but he was a big investment guy with Alvin and Andile. So he was always there. And Alvin would prepare the cars for Meister and Stallman, because Meister drove too. And guys like Stallman, are you kidding me? So, and other guys too. But Stallman is of course a biggie in anybody's 935 lives, and me going back because of course he raced the hill climb 906s and 910s and stuff. So anyway, they put the car up for sale because Howard decides that he's maybe, not going to race it again for whatever reason. And Alvin calls me and says, yeah, listen, I know you're into this whole Porsche car thing. You think you got someone that wants to buy, our Longtail 935. And I thought, oh, my God, are you kidding me? I'd kill for that car. And it just goes to show, Alvin and my friendship, even way back then. And me being in the business and knowing guys who were buying and selling cars, because I was about a lot. either in California or in Florida, and lots of new car people here. And vintage racing is starting big on the East Coast, way bigger than it was on the West Coast. Crazy that it was really bigger here because of Jerry Sutterfield. Sebring, Daytona, blah, 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 all this other stuff. It was all started locally. All these SVRA, all these big HSR, they were all started, on the other side of the Macon County line. So anyway, I talked to Preston, and I said, Andau is going to sell their 935. He goes, that car is pretty cool. And I said, yeah. And he says, well, there's a big plate to fill. You buy that car, you're going to have to start winning races. And I said, but I'm the one that said if you got me a good car, I'd win races. We'd win races. You'd win races. You'd see how different it is to get to win one. And we were on the podium a few times for sure, but not often enough. And we didn't race a full season, so it wasn't like we had a season to get a first place. We went as far as Atlanta, and then a couple times we went to Elkhart and to Mosport and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, we do the deal, and Preston trades. The 1935 we had was an ex-Interscope 934 that was converted, because they all got converted, and I converted a lot of them. So it was a pretty cool car. So Alvin said, okay, and this is the truth. I think we paid $60,000 and the car, and the 935 back then was probably worth $25,000. That was it. Mm-hmm. So Alvin was spitting rubber nickels doing the deal, and we got the car. And we got it to Collier's shop. I rented a building from Collier, and for the racing thing. Then I did Collier's cars. I was restoring cars at this point, 4 Miles Collier, because he had a fleet of Porsches. And his part of the shop, I rented one part and did the current stuff there. Marty Hines' 935, Preston's 935s, because we had two of them then, before we traded the one to get the long tail. We get the long tail. We're going into the finale at Daytona. I don't think it was the Paul Revere, because that was an Iowa. It was the finale, which was Thanksgiving weekend. It was today of when they did it. It was always the Saturday or Sunday right after Thanksgiving, which, crazy enough for me, the Thanksgiving weekend is Sharon's and my wedding anniversary, the 23rd. So for the first 13 years, I was at Daytona during our anniversary. And, Sharon's pretty easygoing. But we took the car there, and Preston said, okay, big shot, why don't we put some drivers in the car? And he let me hire Al Holbert and Doc Bundy.
Wow.
And Al got in that car, and he made a believer out of me that a driver could be an engineer. Because remember, in those days, the guy... your crew chief was the engineer. If you had a good crew chief, he could do everything an engineer. If you had a bad crew chief, he was bad at one or the other, or both. But in those days, there was no engineers. No one even knew. We all thought an engineer was a guy that piloted a train. There was no such thing as an engineer on a car.
Yeah.
Maybe in Indy cars, but only new there, too, because the crew chief got the credit, okay? So we go there, and God, it's been so long. And I remember the first 35 years, but we might have got the pole, or we were second on the front row. And I remember this one time when Al came in, and he said, "What do you got for bump rubbers in the front, on the front struts on top of the shocks?" And I have to look at Andy, because Andy was the suspension guy, to tell me what we had there. And we always went with the setup at Daytona with a 935. And this one really wasn't a 935. It was a custom-built 935-looking race car. Tube frame, blah, blah, blah. Torsional stiffness like you can't believe. Unbelievable car. Probably the best 935 ever made, because it was tough and fast. JLP3 won a lot of races, and it was an ultra cool car too, but it wasn't a long tail. The swap shop car was a long tail and a short tail. So, yes, the JLP car won more races and a championship. But for me personally, I had both cars, so I know all about both cars. But the Andau car, I think, is probably the best 935 ever made. The Moby Dick car was a fantastic car, but it was aluminum, so it yielded, it did this, it did that. It was unsafe. hence, Ralph Stallman lost his life in one. And it was the crash that got him. Who's to say it was the car? But so when I talk about everything, I don't just mean it was the fastest car, it was just the safest. I incorporate all. So that's why I think that swap shop car's it for coolness.
Yeah.
They take the car. He comes in and he asked me about the bump rubbers, and I said, "We got 2 and 2, hard or soft?" And I said, "Andy, hard or soft?" And Andy says, "Soft." Al says, "Okay. Take one out of the front right. Take the whole bump rubber off, or both lumps of the bump rubber? No, just cut it in half. Take one lump out." Okay. Nobody has ever said anything like that before. While we're at practice, right there, we marked the strut because you had to mark things or realign the car, and we took it off right there, which is something you didn't do. We unloaded the front strut right there on the pit lane, took a bump rubber out, and he went out and he came and he says, "This thing's starting to handle now. What's it got for bars?" And I said, "Nothing's original. This car's all custom made by Glenn Blakely," and he knew who Blakely was, who built the Don Garlett's first rear engine dragster.
Wow.
That ought to tell you who Glenn Blakely was. Okay, so he goes, he says, "Okay, well, just take some bar out of the back." I said, "We can do that." So I took bar out. The guy, and he went out, and he was, every time we made a change, he was a half a second quicker. It was like, oh my God, I am now living in it doesn't get any better than this. I got Al Holbert in the car, and Doc Bundy was no slouch, don't get me wrong. And we're going to win a race right out of the box. I don't know where we finished because we were leading, and Al started and probably put it in the lead, and then Bundy got in, and he had a little bit of an off-roader, and he collected the nose and took the nose off the car, literally off the car. And on the radio, I said, "If you can drive it, keep driving it, because there's not that much time left in the race, and unless someone black flags us, we still could get on the podium." And he drove that car with nothing on the front of it. Now, you got to remember, in that day, we didn't have the bus stop in the back.
Yeah.
We did 3 turns at Daytona. So by the time you hit 3, you were doing 215 mile an hour anyway. And that car has the track record at 223, I think, before they changed to the bus stop. Because we broke the record, and it still holds the pole at the 24 Hours of Daytona, and, of course, when we went to the next race, which was the first race of the season, now from the finale, the last race of the season, now we were ready. And that's when the PR starts with A.J. Foyt and Bob Wollek. Preston already knew who Wollek was and was able to get him because Wollek wanted to come to Daytona and race at Daytona. And
because you guys had worked with A.J. in the 935 for a little bit, so A.J. was...
This was the 935. So he was in the 935, really our first big race. Was the 24 Hours of Daytona.
Wow. We
raced the finale in that car. That was it. Then we rebuilt the car and then went back in 83, just, December to January, and then raced the car there. We had Wollek and Ballalena, 2 Frenchies, and Ballo came because he brought money, because Preston, I'm sure, was a pretty good businessman that he is, was able to not have to pay Bob, but Ballo brought money. So he probably just said, "Okay, give it to him." We got a deal. So it was going to be the 3 of them, Preston, Wollek, and Ballo. Ballo was just his short name. And Wollek was, "Hey, you." You never called him asshole, even though he was, because, he throws something at you. And I say asshole with respect because one of the best drivers I ever worked with.
Sure.
Unbelievable. The brilliant Bob Wollek, unbelievable. But yeah, we got along, so I say that kiddingly because we'd refer to each other that way, but what a great man he was. But anyway, so we're off and running, and it wasn't until AJ was there, and I like to still say I get the credit for saying, "Boy, how would you like to have AJ Foyt in our car?" And he took it and ran with it. And he came back about 15 minutes later and said, "AJ says if he breaks that old Aston Nimrod, he's going to come and drive with us." And I went, "Are you serious?" He goes, "Yeah, I just asked him." I went, Okay, that would go over like a lead balloon.
Wow.
So we're racing, and Foyt's car breaks down. And before I know it, here comes AJ. It's just getting dark.
So this is 84, I believe?
83.
83.
83. Yeah, 83. 85 was the 962. Okay, so now here's AJ. He comes into the mold of things. Ballow's sleeping, so there's no one to rat on anybody. Wollek's in the car. Preston started the race and got out. I did enough. I'm out of here. So we really needed to get another guy. These cars, didn't have big ground effects, but, two guys at Daytona 935 is asking for a lot. So here comes AJ. He's walking up, well, how's it going, guys? Blah, blah, blah. I said, oh, my God, this is AJ Foyt. I'm young enough to know who AJ Foyt is and the status of AJ Foyt.
Sure.
This is like having Lincoln be your dinner guest. I mean, President Lincoln, when it comes to car stuff.
Sure.
So, oh, my God, AJ, I grew up, one of the guys down the street worked on cars at Gardena Raceway in Ascot. And he knew all the guys, and, all these hot dog Indy guys would do sprint races at Ascot, sprint midgets, they called them. And then they went off to Indy. So racing, even at that one, we'd go to Ascot and watch the sprint cars run. And we'd watch Rick Mears race his first dune buggy racer on the TT course when he was a kid. So back to what I got to see as an education between Gardena and Ascot for the dirt guys. I got all that too. So here he is, a god. And Preston says, when Bob comes in, we'll put AJ in. I said, well, Bob just went out and he'll double stand. He goes, well, we have time then. So AJ says, well, tell me a few things about the car. And I said, well, you must know about the big boost knob. I said, don't touch it. And I said, everything else is kind of like a street Porsche if you know about them. I said, there's, headlights are there and the brakes the same, and it has a bias adjustment for the brakes, but try not to touch it unless it gets really wet, and blah, 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 because the car's really fitted to the lead driver, which is Bob Wollek. And he goes, is he any good? Oh, my God, and I'm just like, here it goes, man, already. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's exactly how he said it, but of course, when you're, shaking and trembling at your knees because you're talking to AJ Foyt, and you watched him win at least 2 Indy 500s on closed circuit TV, this is a moment for Kevin Jeannette. So, and I'm taking every bit of it in, let me tell you. So we're chatting on about the car, then Preston's got the idea to put him in another car, an Aiken. Bob Aiken's red Aiken Coca-Cola car already had a problem and was out of the race. So Preston walked Foyt down, and they sat him in Aiken's 935, which is a K3. It's a Kramer car. So it's not, the acclimation between the two cars is totally different. You can't get out of one and think you're going to get in the same car.
Yeah.
Because it's a tube-frame car, you sit low, the bars are high to protect you for safety. Remember I said that swap shop cars, really, the Andile car is really a safe-built car. So, and AJ's not a small guy. So I instantly think, oh boy, this is interesting. So he at least now knows that the gear shift is to the right of the steering wheel. And the brakes are seemingly the same. It's the same pedal system in both cars because they just adapted it to the tube frame car from a racing 935. So, okay, fine. The moment is coming. Wollek has now put the thing back in the lead because we had 2 turbocharger problems early in. We blew 2 turbos, one at one time and one at another. And that was, you never saw Alvin Springer and Dieter Eisenhofer work harder in their life. Probably the last race they ever worked over the wall, too. And it was me and them changing turbos, on this car that needed to go 23 and a half more hours. So before you know it, car comes in. It's a moment of truth. Foyt is all buttoned up and ready to get in. Well, I'm changing wheels, too, and then I have to, help the drivers whatever they need, because you could just about do what you wanted back then. There was no speed limit in the pit lane. You could have 4 guns. You could You could have tires sitting out. You could do anything you wanted. It was cowboy days racing in IMSA in the 70s and 80s for sure.
Yeah.
So I do my wheel and start helping with the drivers. And getting AJ in there wasn't just like putting Wollek in. Preston's, of course, taller. He was taller than the other guys on the team, but not a heavy set guy for any stretch of the imagination. So, and he could get in by himself, okay. So we just kind of pushed him in. Wollek never saw who he was playing. He just thought he was big. It was Preston. He didn't know. At that point, he didn't know that Preston wasn't even going to race anymore. Because keep him in the not know. That way, nothing's asked or said, right?
Absolutely.
So he helps push Foyt in the car, and then I jump in and help him with the belts, and off he goes. But before he gets in the car, while we're waiting for Walt to come in, countdown, 10 lap, 9 lap, 4 laps, 2 laps, Foyt says, "Tell me again how it shifts." And I said, "This is really cool. I'm telling AJ Foyt how to shift a Porsche 935. I said, "It shifts. It's an H pattern, just like a Volkswagen." And you know how the dog turns their head to the left and to the right?
Yeah.
And he does that, and he says, "What makes you think I've ever driven a Volkswagen?" Quote, unquote. Whether he remembers that or not, me being a Volkswagen guy, it might say that on my tomb, or my urn, as we say. And I said, reverse. In a Volkswagen, you press down and pull back, but in this car, you push over and you go forward. And then he says, "What makes you think I'm going to need reverse?" And I thought to myself, again, that might have been the dumbest thing I ever said. You're telling AJ Foyt where reverse is, because that means he's done spun out.
You're creating an enemy here already.
Oh, my God. Enemy 101, but I still am shaken. So off he goes. Of course, Dave Despain, I think Bell was there giving commentary, too, and someone else. I never remember, even though, like I said, in the day I could recite it by every second of time. And they come up, and Wollek pulls his helmet off, and now Ballow's there, and Preston's there. And Dave Despain or Derek or someone's got a mic going in Preston's head as to how'd you get AJ Foyt. And it's busy. You can imagine we're in the lead. It's busy in our pits. Because AJ's there.
Of course.
And everybody knows it, except Bob Wollek. Bob Wollek, I guarantee, was the first human being to say live on TV the F word. Because he said, "Who the F is AJ Foyt?" When I had to tell him AJ Foyt was in the car, because Preston said, "You tell him." I'm not telling him. Oh my God! They got it on tape somewhere. Every word for word.
So tell me about how this exchange goes on between the two of them, because this is, within the family, this is some great lore.
And that was our man Kevin Jeannette. What a character. What an absolute character. Now you can see why Gunnar is such a cool cat. You would definitely have to say he gets it from his parents for sure. All right, well, we're going to say farewell here and get you ready to go straight into part 2. As always, I'm Marshall Pruett. This is Marshall Pruett Podcast. Thank you for listening.